Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today we make a return to archaeological themed content. In case you didn't know, I took a brief break from talking about archaeology on my channel to document the process of making an 18th century gown for myself. And for the past month I've been putting out videos about that. But I know that some of you are probably wanting to know a little bit more about archaeology, so we're going to return to the main topic of the channel. Today we are going to cover my second summer digging in Jordan. For anyone who's been here for a while, you will know that I have been doing videos covering each year of studying archaeology during my undergraduate degree, and then as well I also have spoken about my first summer digging in the Kingdom of Jordan on an archaeological excavation as a part of my studies because that was required by my course. My first dig happened in the summer of 2010. I then went back to school and did my third year of my degree, and then in the upcoming summer of 2011 I was given the opportunity to go back and dig in Jordan, and obviously I took it. This ended up being the longest amount of time that I went away for digging continuously. Gone for about 3 months from May till August, and I actually ended up being on 2 different field schools, and then I had like a little bit in between where I got taken in by another field school while I was floating around in between waiting for my second field school to start. In terms of why I decided to go back again, I would think it's pretty obvious that I absolutely loved digging. I loved the experience. I had a great time my first time around, so why wouldn't I want to try and repeat that experience again? Also financially, with the way my dig worked, the more times that you came back, the less money it cost you. The second time around that I did it, I got a discount on either the flight or the accommodation, and I also applied for a scholarship and got some more help that way. So this kind of helped me offset the cost of going as well. A third reason why I decided to go is because they were actually offering a course that I could take on the field school. So my first field school, that 6 weeks actually constituted a course for credit for my degree, and I completed it, I passed it, and everyone in my degree had to take a field season course for a minimum of 6 weeks. Now, once you finish that, you didn't have to go back and dig anymore as a part of your degree, but the university did offer a secondary course that you could take after you'd taken the first one, which covered more supervisor level content for being on an excavation. So this would involve, you know, looking after volunteers and teaching them what to do, writing bi-weekly reports, writing a final report, being responsible for a square and everything that's going on inside of it, and then you were graded on all the content that came out of that. And this counted as like a 4th year credit because obviously it was a bit more advanced than the basic field school. So my second summer in Jordan, they decided to offer this advanced fieldwork course, and I thought it would be a good opportunity to take because it would also allow me then to have a bit of a lighter course load in my 4th year. So instead of having to take 5 classes a semester, I'd have to take 4. So this only covers one of the field schools that I went on, and that was the second one. The first one that I ended up going on was associated with my original field school, but not. It was run by the osteoarchaeologist attached to my project, and the thing with my original project was that while it was like a town that we were digging, there wasn't a ton of osteological or skeletal material for her to have to deal with. So at some point she had actually been invited by the monks of Mount Nebo, which is a famous monastery in Jordan, to go and basically excavate crypts at their monastery while she was in Jordan, and that way she would still be able to excavate just basically osteological skeletal material, but she would still be on hand to handle anything that came up from my original project. She obviously said yes, and she had been doing this project for a couple years. She usually brought her own students with her, but during my first field school I discovered that actually osteology might be something that I would want to pursue and do a little bit more of. And I sucked up to her and brown-nosed and made her aware of the fact that I was interested. So she invited me to come with her and her students in 2011 to excavate at Nebo. Again, this summer was a bit different because she wasn't going to be going alongside my other project. She was actually going to do it separately. I don't know why that was decided, but I assume it's something to do with schedules. So she decided to go in May until the middle of June and do a 6-week season. And then it kind of worked out for me because then my next field school was going to start about 2 weeks later. So I could just stay the remaining time in Jordan and then do the other field school as well. So I just would get a summer of digging in Jordan, which is exactly what I wanted. In Mount Nebo Field School, we ended up going from being a field season that was digging to a lab season analyzing what had already been taken out in previous seasons, which was great because it gave me a lot of time to practice using my Bwickstra and Ubelaker standards and doing lots of analysis on skeletons, and it worked out fine for me and my education. So I was happy with that. This is also the season where myself and Abby, who again I've interviewed in one of the other videos on my channel, she now has a PhD and is working on starting her own archaeological project, so go her. But this is the season that we really bonded and became friends because she was also invited onto this field school and we ended up being roommates, and she was going on to another field school as well after. So we ended up spending almost the entire summer together in Jordan. Smaller project at Nebo was quite different to what I have been used to the first summer because it wasn't this whole thing put on by a school. There was a lot more of organizing things ourselves rather than having them being organized for us. So for example, we were renting a dig house rather than staying at a hotel. So we were responsible for cleaning and the upkeep of the place. We had to make all of our own meals ourselves, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whereas at the hotel, we generally got most of those provided for us. Any field trips or entertainment, we organized ourselves. We ended up making friends with another bigger field team that was also in town, and a couple of us hitched a ride with them to Petra on their trip and just kind of paid our own way. So that was the second time that I got to go to Petra. We went to the Dead Sea. Myself and one of the other students on the dig, we decided that we were going to go to Aqaba on the southern coast of Jordan. Coincidentally, it was around my birthday, so it turned out into a bit of a birthday trip for me, and it was really exciting to do. We rented a car and we drove down there and ended up staying a couple days, and it was hot, but it was amazing. I highly recommend going to Aqaba if you have the chance. Myself, Abby, and one of the other students, we went to Wadi Rum. I hadn't done it in my previous field season, so we got to go out to the real desert reserve, stay out under the stars. Well, they stayed out under the stars. I slept in a tent because I don't like bugs. We got to hike all over the place. Abby actually ended up learning how to drive because we were in the middle of nowhere with our tour guide. There were just 3 of us, and he taught her how to drive stick in an old Jeep in the middle of the desert, which was like a crazy experience, but so much fun. Once the Nebo project ended, I had this gap in between when my next one started, and conveniently at that time there was a third field school that was starting up right as Mount Nebo was ending. We actually rented our dig house from this other field school because they either owned it or they usually lived in it every summer, and they gave us the contacts to be able to rent it. So as soon as we were done, they started. They were another Canadian field school that was located in the same town as me, but on a different project, and Abby was working for them. And the field director of this project was generous enough to allow me to sleep rent-free on their floor for about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, until my next project started. I did obviously have like a mattress, but I just like didn't have a bed frame. And I went to their dig every day. I didn't actually dig on their project because I wasn't like signed up for their permit system and, you know, the way insurance works and everything. So I wasn't actually digging anything, but I went onto site every day and I maybe helped out with some records or some sieving or gave people advice, but I didn't actually like do any physical work. But that was a nice way to spend about maybe like a week and a half, I think, before my next project started. So with field schools, oftentimes people will go in advance to set everything up so for when the students come, because, you know, things have to be taken out of storage, meetings have to be had, permits need to be collected, etc., etc. There is an amount of setup that needs to be done for these things. So because I was already in Jordan, I volunteered to be part of the setup team for this second project. So I actually started maybe about a week earlier than the rest of the students because I was already there. So I went to our hotel that we usually stayed in. I was staying there, and I spent time just driving to Amman, to where we had our locker of all of our equipment at Acor, and taking out everything no scorpions, thankfully, from storage, bringing it back, and then organizing it for when all the students were going to arrive. Once the students arrived, our field season started. This season, because I was more advanced because I'd already done a field season before, I was promoted from a volunteer to a square supervisor, which means that I was in charge of a square and everything in it. Usually these squares are about 5 by 5 meters. Mine was a bit different that season. We called it the super square. It had previously been, I think, about half excavated, but they had some stuff that they still wanted to find out, so they just expanded it, and we dug down the rest of the square that had been unexcavated and past its boundaries. For that season, I was given 2 volunteers to look after, 2 students. The way the super square ended up working out, I actually had them working in about 2 different areas that needed to be investigated, which meant that I essentially had double the amount of paperwork that I would have normally, because I had to keep everything separate. Things that I learned during this season are that I'm not a natural delegator. These students, they're also trying to learn. As a supervisor, you know, you should be able to give them some work to do off hours once they're finished digging, like, you know, tracing drawings or organizing paperwork or making sure something's entirely filled in. When I started that season, I just wanted to do it all myself because, you know, if you do it yourself, that's the only way to be done. It can be done properly. It's very stressful and means that you have to spend a lot of time outside of the actual day making sure that everything is in order. And luckily, one of my volunteers, she was really persistent in asking if I had extra stuff for her to do. And then slowly I ended up giving my volunteers more work to do so that the burden was less on me to get all of the paperwork done. I also learned that I really like smashing rocks. We had Bedouin workers assisting us on site. They would take our goofas, which are these baskets made out of old tires that we would fill with dirt. They'd take them, they'd sieve them, they'd get rid of them. If we had big rocks, they'd help move them, etc., etc. Usually you would only get about 1 Bedouin worker per square, and I was no different that summer. However, like I mentioned before, I actually had 2 areas, so I needed to keep everything separate, and that includes any finds or anything that you're finding in the sieve. What I ended up doing was assigning my Bedouin worker to one of my volunteers, and then I basically served as much as I could as the worker for my other student. So I would empty her goofas, I would do the sieving, etc., etc. When it came to the rocks that needed removing, I would smash. So I got to use a sledgehammer to break up some pieces of limestone. I like to think that I was quite good at it, but I quite enjoyed doing that. And I also had a real penchant for when you could pick up a rock, flinging it off the side of the tell and watching it tumble down. I don't know, there's something satisfying about it. The difference between a volunteer and a square supervisor, there's quite a bit more responsibility. You're supposed to be able to keep track of everything, keep it all neat, make sure that all your sheets are getting filled out properly, that you have everything you need every day going up onto site. You're also supposed to obviously set an example for your students. Every time I was in Jordan, I tried to apply the philosophy of first person up the hill, last one down it. I was always going up, untying the tent with all our equipment, taking everything out, helping everyone carry everything up. One of the bigger differences between being a volunteer and a supervisor is also the amount of free time that you have during the day. Because the way that our day usually worked is that you were up at about 4, you were on site around 5:30, you were actually working by about 6, you end and you're off site by around 12, you then come back to the hotel, you have lunch, and then you have a couple of hours off until either 3 or 4, I can't remember exactly when, and then you work doing lab work, so washing pottery, dry brushing bones, doing pottery analysis, etc., until about 6 o'clock, and then you're free to do whatever you want in the evenings. So as a volunteer, that was kind of all you had to do. But as a square supervisor, I ended up having to use a lot of my spare time to make sure that I was on top of my paperwork. So instead of having tons of naps during lunchtime, I would be working on my laptop. I would also be working on it on the evenings and weekends. Not to say that I didn't get any free time at all, but definitely I didn't have as much as just a basic student when I was a volunteer. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because, like I said, I learned a lot more about supervising and also about writing because we had to submit bi-weekly reports for each of our squares and then a final report, and I would get feedback on it, and having to put that all together, you know, takes time, and I'm glad that I got that experience to be able to do that. Highlights of my second season outside of the actual digging would include going to Petra for the third time, when one of the other supervisors and I decided to take a 3-hour ride to Petra to visit our friends on this other Canadian field school, Abby included. They were doing their own trip to Petra and we kind of crashed it. I didn't end up going with my field school to Petra because by that time I had been 3 times. I also went for the first time to Wadi Mujib and went hiking up a waterfall. Wadi Mujib is a tourist attraction where you go, they give you a bunch of life jackets, and then you can hike your way up a couple waterfalls to an end waterfall. It's nice and cool. You can swim, and then on the way back you basically get to use all the waterfalls as water slides. So it's kind of like nature's water park. It's a great experience and I highly recommend for everyone. I was also lucky enough to be invited to a Jordanian wedding. Within Madaba, the town that we were all staying in, there was this shop run by this man called Yusuf. He is a retired banker and he just wanted to socialize with people. He didn't really so much care about selling things, and he loved when all the students came into town for the dig season because he would just host them. Every time you came into his shop, he would give you cookies and tea and you could just sit and chat for hours. He would have famous tea drinking competitions that would result in probably quite a lot of vomit and people having to stay up for 24 to 48 hours because that tea, Jordanian tea, is full of sugar. He's just kind of known in that community of everyone that goes there for the dig season. And it just so happened that, again, because I had been there before, and then while I was on the smaller Nebo field school, there weren't that many other digs in town, so we spent a lot of time at Yusuf's shop. And we just got to know him really well, and that summer his son was getting married, so he invited a couple of us from the digs that he knew better to come to one of their pre-wedding receptions. So I didn't go to the actual wedding, but I went to one of the parties around the wedding, which was such a fun time. Lots of good food, good dancing, good people. As I've said before, I absolutely loved my time in Jordan. I love my time digging. I think it really helps you build a lot of really great relationships with the people that you're digging with, some like lifetime friendships that I still have. I have from Jordan, like my friendship with Abby. While it's expensive, I 100% recommend it and I don't regret it, and it was totally worth it for me. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please put them in the comments box below. Give me a follow on social media. My Instagram is full of tons of food that I've been cooking during this time where we've all been staying at home. Please check out the other videos in this series if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what it's like and what to expect when you're studying for a degree in archaeology, or if you're wanting to go on a field school. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye!